In
sort
that
of after that.
sense, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So again, it's a way that like this is the first time in human history where we no longer just need to worry about getting food for ourselves and our family. It's now we're playing this social game with other people, which again eats up into our free time in a very large way.
So
So
I don't like the way these are connected, because you say eats into our free time in a very large way. Like slavery and serfdom probably didn't give you like a fuck ton of free time to do like what you would want to, or to pursue interests that you'd want to.
well, it's interesting you bring that up. I mean, slavery, yeah, that's if you are a slave, then you're treated as a tool. That's different. But if you think about feudalism, actually, now not a proponent of feudalism at all
Really?
here
Because
by
it
any
sounds like
stretch
we're
of the
about to say,
imagination.
well, in feudalism they actually had a lot more free time, but to do
No,
what?
no, no, no. That's
What?
that's not what I was going to say at all. No,
Okay.
what I was going to say though is that yeah, well, obviously they didn't have technologies, but what they did have is they only worked to sustain themselves, and then built into that, obviously they worked to pay off the taxes of their lords. But essentially, as long as they were fed, as long as their lords were fed, that was it. They were done, and this still took a very long amount of time because it was very very long ago. Not much technology, so farming did take a while, but nonetheless, it wasn't a matter of once everybody's been fed, you're still working more anyway. But after that point, you're done. And that's
Okay,
so that's what I
I'm
mean.
gonna concede immediately. I might be a total fucking moron, but like under feudalism, weren't you essentially not like a slave, but kind of weren't you for like whatever royal family or whatever like noble family you worked for? Like you had to live there,
Yeah,
you had to
yeah.
work there. So weren't they
No, yeah,
scraping
and
like
that
the
sucks.
surplus shit off of your labor, except they just used it to feed their family and shit, the same way that a capitalist would, but for profit?
Yeah, yeah, totally. But then built into capitalism as well is then this element of expansion, and you didn't have that in feudalism, is what I'm saying. So like, yeah, the capitalist needs to be sustained as well. The lord needs to be sustained as well. That's all built in. But that's still that like, if you want to call it quota, that once you hit, you're done, and that's how it works under feudalism.
Okay, so
Yeah.
capitalism is bad because it drives to expand itself, which leads people to working more,
Well, I
kind
mean,
of.
I'd be precarious about saying it's bad because Marxists tend to take on a more like a less moralistic approach.
Okay.
I think that the wonders of capitalism have been brilliant because of this mass expansion that it drives, it forces everybody to do. Really, we now have a large abundance of a lot of resources that we would never be able to dream of in feudalism. It's just the Marxist position then is there's a certain point where capitalism has then played its part. It's done this expansion to the point where we have enough like technological progress, we have enough resources where now we no longer need this kind of social structure pushing us onwards at all points in time. So that's the kind of that I think that's like a very basic point about how capitalism, yeah, it's pushing us to work more than we would otherwise have to.
Okay, but like it seems like if we accept this premise that like, well, we shouldn't have to work this much just to remain competitive with other people, like the only way to realistically implement this is in one of two ways. Either one, you have to shut down like our entire trade system because otherwise other countries will outcompete us, or two, you would need like literally a global socialist movement where everybody can agree to not like outcompete one another, so that it's not like a race to this capitalist bottom or whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, you are touching on some interesting points there that obviously are
This
debated a
Zoomer
lot in
hasn't
leftism,
read
but
about the
generally, yeah, this would
Stakhanovite
be
movement.
a pretty global thing. You can't have kind of half socialism, half capitalism. It's got to be like constructed in such a way that taking your products to a market to sell them wouldn't even make sense in the first place. But
Yeah, so
again,
like
this
how do
this
we
is
get, what is the way that we move towards a global socialist movement?
that is the $1 million question. But it's not something that I don't think there's one definitive answer that you give. I think it's very contextual, and the reason that is now I was hoping to get into this from a different angle, which I'll hopefully be able to come back to. But essentially, you know,
Well,
economic
because
crash is built into capitalism, like fundamentally, and I can explain why. And I would actually really like to explain that as well. That's the kind of second point I was gonna make. But if we just deal with that for a moment, so yeah, that's built into capitalism. So every, it's roughly 10 years, isn't it?
yeah, the
That
boom bust
you
or
have an
whatever.
economic crash.
Mm-hmm.
This obviously causes a detriment in material conditions for everybody, and as we see even right now, you have people being pushed to further extremes on both the right and left because they become more unsatisfied with the society in which they live. um, and that causes tensions. The system further breaks down. Eventually, you get these like what are called like revolutionary periods, where you have the potential for people to rise up, completely overthrow the system, and either that can either happen from the perspective of progress, where we can then try to build on capitalism to kind of have all these lovely resources without having to continually fulfill this quota of expansion, or you can have it from the other perspective of like a brutalist fascist dictatorship which wants to essentially save capitalism from this idea of progress. So the question of how then you actually get to socialism is, again, you can't really say like off the bat for any given time, because it's very dependent on the context under which these economic crashes and then extremist movements are being brought up in. So it really is, you have to look at the conditions you're given, and if there is if there is an opportunity for a genuine socialist movement to take control, on a roughly global scale as well, then that's perfect. Obviously, a lot of times in history that hasn't, and you've got fascism instead.
Has
So
this ever happened in
it's
so like you're talking about like this would have to be like a literal like a totalitarian-esque or like authoritarian-esque like socialist takeover, because not only would you need to have a socialist takeover in one country, you would have to force through threat of violence like socialism onto these other countries as well. Otherwise they would just become capitalist and grow incredibly wealthy, outcompeting all the other people in the global economy, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just the same way that liberalism came about. This authoritarian revolution that overthrew the monarchy. You know,
Okay.
but
I mean,
yeah, I mean,
I mean, this is like super fantastical. Like, what am I supposed to say? I mean, like, if we could do it, it's great.
well,
But
I
like,
mean, I'm
you're
just saying that
you're
it's
saying
not.
that we need like a
I'm not.
violent global socialist revolution where everybody, man, you guys like can't even get along with each other on like Facebook. Like, how are you gonna like coordinate? And not to mention the fact that you lefties like, or I keep saying you lefties, like lefties like kill themselves like as soon as they get into power anyway, where they start purging like other leftist groups. How could they possibly enforce this on like a global
Well,
scale?
that's I mean, this is really delving into territory I wasn't really hoping to
Okay,
get
sure, we
too
can back out
deep
from that.
into,
Sure.
but just I will say the whole purging thing and the whole all of that. I mean, that you only actually see that in like Stalinism and stuff like that. There are countless other revolutionary examples where you don't get those kind of things because they're different contexts, they're different people, and things like that.
Okay,
But
but like,
anyway,
my history in China is way weaker. But wasn't like the Cultural Revolution and shit in the People's Republic of China, like, didn't that have like some
oh yeah,
aspects
China
of
was a
like...
mess. China was a
Okay,
complete
so like
mess.
our
But
largest examples of this like socialist idea working, like I don't really care much about like the 4 years that Catalonia was socialist. Like I don't know if I can like extrapolate that to a larger global setting.
yeah, and I'm not saying you should, right? And I'm not saying that's like the example we should draw from. But what I am saying is that it does kind of show that it's not an inherent part of socialism or anything, and it definitely can't be an inherent part of revolution, because again, the liberalism that we live under today came about through this exact same way. So you'd have to show somehow why it's communism that's special that gets this. But personally, again, when I think when we've seen examples where that hasn't happened, even if they were small and short-lived, I think that does kind of go against this idea that it's inherently built into a communist revolution. But again, this is like way off. So
Okay.
yeah, I'd like to let's go out to talking about capitalism, because I mean, you say you're a man that's interested in practical things, right? So this is why I thought this might be more interesting to you, because we're talking about the real world and shit. So okay, so we've kind of covered one way in which capitalism eats into our free time, is making us work more than we would necessarily need to. And I think a very interesting but initially counterintuitive way that it does this as well is actually through technological advancement and progress, right? Because everybody always thinks when we get new technology, sorry, that we're going to it's going to make our lives so much easier. We're going to have to work less. It's going to be great. But what we actually see in history is almost the opposite of that is true. It makes some people's lives worse because they get unemployed, and it makes the remaining people working. It actually means they're expected to have a much greater output than they were before the technological advancement. And again, I know this seems counterintuitive.
Well,
but
it seems counterintuitive because we're only analyzing one side of this transaction. Like it also provides like a materially huge benefit to the consumers of said goods that are produced by
it
said
does.
firms, right?
It very much does. Yeah, and that's great. And I'm gonna so if you allow me to set up a scenario,
Okay, yeah,
walking
go for it.
through the processes of
Mhm.
technological advancement. Yeah, this goes over all of it. So okay, so yeah, imagine you've got like a handful of businesses like all producing the same thing and selling in the same market, right? Or say they're producing widgets. So in the widget market, you know, it's roughly been brought down to a pretty stable price. Everybody's selling at roughly the same cost, to the point that if they start undercutting each other, they're going to be eating into their profits too much to be sustainable and stuff, right? So now imagine then that one of these companies gets their hands on this new widget making machine, and now suddenly they can make widgets at twice the speed of everybody else, and then, you know, widgets are effectively half the price, and it's great. So what happens there then is now this company can start selling widgets much cheaper because they can make them much faster. But think about what they're going to be doing at first. They're not going to just instantly, you know, go to the lowest point that they can now go. They're going to start undercutting that existing stable cost just enough to start stealing people's businesses, and then make loads and loads of profit in the process. But like with any technological advancement, eventually it does become generalized to the whole industry. So now everybody has this brilliant widget making machine, and they all start, you know, undercutting each other more and more until they reach again a new point where if they start undercutting any more, they'll be hurting those profits too much to be sustainable. So now the end result of this is, yeah, like you were saying, this is great for the consumer because now widgets are half the price. That's brilliant. What you have to then look at is, well, now a single widget is half the price of what it originally was. So if we look at this from the perspective of the producer, now they need to be selling 2 widgets to make the same amount they were before with just 1 widget. They need to like double the amount that they're selling in order to just sustain themselves, right? This is what we generally call the rate of profit to fall. The rate that you're actually making on each individual widget has fallen, so you need to sell a greater volume to just keep up. In fact, maybe even more, because now you spent a bunch of money on machines and stuff.
Okay.
So essentially then, so these workers with these new machines, yeah, they need to be producing double the amount to keep up with things.
Okay.
So already we're seeing an example of where, you know, when capitalism, when technological advancement comes under capitalism, it doesn't reduce the amount of time we have to work. It just
not
doubles
necessarily.
the amount that we have to sell.
That's not necessarily true. One of the reasons why it doubles the amount that you have to sell is because your workforce becomes more efficient as well. So like producing like 10 times, like even if we say 10 times, or we'll be simple, producing 2 times as many widgets might still be an easier job than producing 1 times as many before. Or you would expect that the effort put into producing X number of widgets, or whatever the increased amount of widgets is going to be about equal to the time spent to produce a single widget before, right? But you're able to do it more now because you have more efficient capital that allows you to do that. It's not like somebody is literally spending twice the effort to do something to produce twice as the amount of widgets, right? The effort should be roughly the same. Okay, yeah. Well,
I'm not talking about effort.
Yeah, okay, sure. But like it's not like this person has to work more to produce more widgets. They're just working the same, right?
Yeah, exactly. But
okay,
here's the thing: we've had this machine that half the time it takes to make widgets, but we're still working the exact same amount. Doesn't that seem absurd?
No, it seems good.
Half the amount.
Well, no, because then the consumer wouldn't see a reduction in the cost of widgets. If you just had if you kept all your costs the same or whatever, and now you can make the widgets twice as fast, but the factory is only on for half the time. Well, then you're still paying the same price as a consumer at the end of the day for it.
Well, yeah, but this gets into the fact of like having to buy these things at all just to keep up with the just to sustain themselves.
Yeah, but
right?
there are other
but
positive.
Now that point
to
sustain themselves has been halved, so it could very well be halved.
But it could be, but there are other detrimental effects that could happen as a result of this. For instance, let's say that somebody could create widgets, okay? But they can't actually make these widgets if widgets weren't under a certain price, right? Maybe the idea that factories are creating so many widgets now and these widgets have become so affordable to consumers that this person can now buy it and they can open their own factory producing widgets that need a large number of widgets in order to work. Well, now you've created parallel industries, right? This is specialization of labor and everything that increases when we make our labor more efficient and when we have different people producing different things. So theoretically, you could be creating more jobs this way or creating other beneficial parts to the economy as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why you couldn't, but that doesn't, I don't see how that negates my point.
What is your point ultimately? You're just saying people shouldn't have to work because the economy has become more efficient, or?
Yeah.
Okay, because then your society sucks shit.
When you have free time to do whatever you want.
I don't want free time if I have no computers, no cell phones, no cool instruments.
Dude, I'm not saying we're not going to have technology.
But we wouldn't.
No, listen. If someone wants to make widgets, then people are going to get together to make.
No, they won't. It's not going to be. It's not going to be possible to do so.
Why not?
Because all the widget makers aren't going to be producing widgets at the reduced cost.
But now that well, they would be because these machines exist. But now there's a
No, wait,
need
no,
for
no,
these
they
widgets
wouldn't be.
to
Wait,
exist.
hold on. We have to understand this fundamentally. They would not be, right? Because for a given supply, there is going to be a price set based on the quantity demanded, right? If the supply never increases and it remains static throughout the market because you're reducing your working hours because you have more efficient machines, then the supply of widgets is going to remain the same, and the price, we wouldn't expect to see that price decrease or increase at all. It would stay the same. So no, if somebody wanted to make widgets out of widgets, they wouldn't be able to because the widget price would remain roughly static because you're cutting your hours in response to you being more productive with your labor.
No, but you're missing the point here, because what I'm saying is that the time it actually makes with this isolated example has been halved. Now, if there suddenly becomes an additional need for these things, then yeah, you can put in the time to make more, but now you're just, the level of sustainability is just being raised.
But that's the
what I'm
point of
saying.
capitalism. There's always like a
No,
further
it's
need
not.
for something.
No, because the point of capitalism is to go way further than the point of sustainability, and this actually comes back into the point I was trying to make.
Wait.
right?
What
Where
do you
now
mean
we
by
need to expand.
sustainability? I'm sorry, I
Again,
just want to make sure I
making,
understand.
making the amount that we actually need.
But, yeah, but if you make more things, you can do more shit with it.
Yeah, so if somebody, but you don't just make a bunch of shit and then go, okay, what do I want to do with this now that I've made it? You go, I want to make this, I need this much shit, and now there's a need for that. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
Like,
okay,
if there's
hold
a
on,
need for
fuck.
something,
This
people are
is
gonna
really
do it.
vague. Okay, let me try to study this. So in a capitalist market, you would expect capital to flow to the areas of the market where profit can be made, right? That's generally how capital works, right? Capital
Yeah.
flows to parts of the market where money can be made. So if your widget production is more efficient, right, you can probably have a smaller margin on the profits that you make on said widgets. So you can produce more such that your profits remain at some level, right? So you can produce way more widgets, people will buy them, maybe at a reduced cost, but because you're producing so much more and your costs are decreased because your labor is so much more efficient, you continue to produce more, right? So like, even if your factory worked making 100 widgets, it could still work making 10,000 widgets, right? You
Yeah,
just,
I know, but
yeah.
like this, you don't need to, is what I'm saying. Though.
You
I
don't
feel- I
need to,
still
but
feel
like
you're-
the
Well,
problem
so
that I
why
have with
would
this,
you?
why would you? Because then you can do more cool shit in society.
yeah, right,
Like the problem is that like here, well, no, so like here's my problem. My problem is that you want to stop this. It sounds like you want to stop this right now because you're happy with what we have in society right now. But with this type of
no, God, no.
okay, because it
Not
sounds
at
like if
all,
I would
dude.
apply this type of thinking 200 years ago, we wouldn't have a microprocessor. Nobody would have ever like created more things. Nobody would have ever like we would be working like 30 minutes a day because capital becomes so efficient, right? Because like we had looms that would help you like sew things instead of having people do everything by hand, that people would just completely stop working. And then we never would have advanced to the society that we have today because, oh, well, we've got enough shit now. Like, why would we need to make this thing cheaper or make these goods more affordable to other, sectors of the economy or to consumers?
Yeah, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. I mean, yeah, and again, if you want to talk about it 200 years ago, this comes to the point I was making again, where capitalism it has its job of industrializing society. But once we are industrialized, that's it. And I'm not saying once we're industrialized we stop having technological advancement, not at all. What I am saying though is that we no longer need to go that extra step to fulfill the needs of capital, to fulfill expansion, is what I'm saying, right? And again, coming back to this point of expansion, when we go back to, you've halved the amount of time to make widgets, and now you need to sell double the amount just to make the same amount. Well, there's this problem here, right? Because technological process, it keeps happening over time, and this keeps getting employed in production. So every time this happens, the rate of profit falls and falls and falls. And by the way, quick side point, I want to say the falling rate of profit has been empirically proven. This isn't just theory. I can link you a study if you like. Where
What do you mean by fallen
actually,
rate of profit?
The rate of profit that you're making on average in for goods in an economy.
Uh-huh. That sounds
Yeah,
good.
so-
That sounds like capitalism working, right?
No, because here's the thing. Because like I've said, once the rate of profit falls, now again, it's great for the consumer, but once the rate of profit falls, then you need to sell more and more and more. But if there's no supply to take that, then you have a crisis of overproduction. You have too many things.
Fuck,
you can't sell them
hold
and
on.
the
We got,
economy
oh,
crashes.
fuck, we would have to go back and like do this. So, I'm sorry. My understanding is that if there is very high profit in an industry, there's a market failure there. You never want, like, capital in a society should always flow to the places where there is an excess of profit until that excess disappears. If there is some company that is highly profitable, you would expect other companies to step in and compete against them, and you would expect to see that profit fall, right? There should never be some part of an industry industry that is highly profitable because other companies should step in. Profits should be reduced until the company is making the minimum so that consumers aren't getting fucked on prices. Like that's what it.
That's not what I'm talking about, though.
Yeah, okay, I don't understand that. I guess I'm getting confused on what you mean by profits are falling.
The rate of profit.
What do
Right?
you
So
mean-
the amount that you're actually making back on each individual
Widget
item.
is decreasing. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
and why
now-
does that matter?
Here's the problem. So when that keeps falling and falling and falling, and you sell more and more and more to compensate that fact, and you're, you know, and you have to think of all these tricks like advertising and planned obsolescence and things like that to get people to buy more things than they otherwise would. That only works for a certain amount of time. Eventually, people only need a certain amount of widgets, especially if you've got like five different companies competing against each other making these widgets. So when people stop needing widgets, they stop buying widgets, the economy crashes because you have people continually expanding, continually trying to push out more. Every time there's technological advancement, they now need to
But
make
this
even
wouldn't just be
more.
like a flash crash. There would be some like line where it's like, okay, well, if we produce widgets past this certain point, people are no longer purchasing them, so then we scale back production.
Well, that's what's happened in pretty much almost all economic crashes. And, you know, Great Depression is a great example. Like where it was a crisis of overproduction. You had this massive economic boom, like, and cars are an example. You know, people only needed so many cars, but as soon as people stopped buying cars, the economy crashed.
I need to read more, but I don't think that characterization is correct. That it was literally
I'm
you're
not
telling me.
saying
So you're
it's
saying that
that
the Great
simple.
Depression was like caused just by overproduction?
I'm not saying it's that simple, but it is like a very important factor. And the point is that this relationship is built into capitalism. Because no matter what you do, whenever there's technological progress, people are going to use that to try and make more profits in order to cut their competition. So this relationship is always going to take place. So you're
Then why
always
haven't
gonna
we
have
had
this problem of
multiple
falling rate
Great
of profit.
Depressions?
Well, we have had multiple economic crashes, haven't we? I'm not
Yeah,
saying
but I
they're
don't think
always
that
gonna be
like
as
the
bad as
dot-com boom was like comparable to the Great Depression.
I'm not saying they're all like, you know, in the exact same way, but I'm also not saying that they're all the Great Depression. I'm
Sure,
saying
but I
the
don't think
Great
that I don't think
Depression
there's
is an
anything
example.
inherently horrible about like a boom bust cycle. Like sometimes the economy is doing well.
Is there
sometimes
not?
it's-
I mean, when you have these terrible busts, people can't eat. You have radicalization of people. The system
Okay, I'm not
becomes
trying to
unstable.
to downplay like some of the problems that exist in the United States, but I don't think that the dot-com bubble had like tens of thousands of people starving on the streets. Like some people lost
No,
their
I'm
jobs,
not-
some people
no-
lost
not
their
all of
houses.
them
It was
do,
sad, but like
Yeah, but the point is that eventually this scale must at some point be reached. It's a very it's a very intricate system of like, you know, what the magnitude as to which it happens and why it happens. But the point is that it always does happen, and that it always does produce those conditions for people to be radicalized and then try and topple the system, be it to the far right or the far left. And this is built into capitalism because it's a pretty simple explanation, I think, of what I've laid out. Like, there isn't anything abnormal about this competition with these companies making widgets that I've explained. So this is something that you cannot get around in a capitalist system.
okay. And
And-
then what's the alternative that you propose?
Well, I'm proposing that when these inevitable crashes do happen, that we lean towards the side of socialism rather than the side of fascism.
What is that?
And-
Well, first of all, nothing that we're talking about so far has anything to do with fascism. I don't know where that came
It does it
from.
not, because like I've said, economic crashes, radicalization, this is where fascism comes from.
Where that's like a way off tangential point. I don't
I mean,
think.
it's another point, but like you wanted to clarify on that. So
Do you think we were more or less fascist after the Great Depression?
after the Great Depression, there were more fascists.
But as a
Because
whole, has the country become more fascist over time or less fascist over time?
I'm not talking about the government itself. I'm talking about radicalization of individuals that form political movements which threaten the government itself. Because, you know, every revolution happens after some kind of catastrophe. where
Sure, but
people
like
can't
these
eat.
catastrophes aren't necessarily tied to economic systems. It like
No, not always. Sometimes it's like the First World War and things like that. But
sure, or like
if there
geopolitical
are things-
instability or whatever. Or
yeah, but here's the thing: a type of crisis is built into capitalism. So capitalism is always at some point producing the conditions for its own downfall. That's what I'm saying. There may be other external factors which you know can also do it, but what I'm saying is it's also an inherent trait of capitalism. So it's always going to have this unstable element. It's self-defeating in that way, because what's great about this?
sure, I
is that
understand. This is
actually
Marx talked about the inherent contradiction of capitalism. I understand, right? This is
Yeah,
why
but-
it'll
but
inevitably fail. Well,
This is also, I just want to say, this is also like capital under perfect conditions. This is what it naturally trends towards if left unfettered. Like this is just
Sure, of course, but that's why nobody has a completely unfettered capitalist system. Nowhere in the world, or at least as I understand it exists.
You can't regulate this out unless you want to stop.
Okay, well then what's the
employing
alternative?
technological-
Because every socialist system has miserably fucking failed, like in a much quicker amount of time than like the capitalist systems we have right now. Like
I'm not necessarily talking about the alternative. I'm just trying to prove that capitalism is inherently unstable and is inherently self-defeating. That's all I'm trying to say, and I'm also trying to say that it is a detriment to our freedom and time. So that, yeah, what I'm saying is that this period of which it's done, it served its purpose, okay, has passed, and now it's pretty much just detriment. We don't need to live with any of this detriment anymore. So what I'm saying is that the alternative is simply stripping away these social structures of capital which prevent us from enjoying, you know, from a crisis of overproduction. Like, overproduction should be a brilliant thing. That shouldn't be something that crashes our economy, but it is. Technological advancement and automation should be a brilliant thing. But
wait,
instead
why should overproduction be a good thing? It's an inefficient allocation of resources. Why should we like that?
Well, I'm not talking about from efficiency. I'm saying if you compare that to feudalism, where people would starve in the winter because they didn't have enough food, it's a lot better having way too much food.
That's not even necessarily true, though. I'm not trying to nitpick, but like maybe overproduction of food destroys land, so that in the future we all end up starving to death, or causes climate change or global warming.
This is semantics from the point I'm trying to make, though, right?
Yeah, well, no, it's not, because like you can't just pick and choose. Like, oh well, overproduction can be good because some people starve, but like overproduction can be really bad too. Like, I mean, it really depends. That's not a.
I'm not saying we should just intentionally overproduce, dude. All I'm saying is that the point that it can be a problem in, like, not even from external factors, just from our economy, it can be a problem that we have too much of something is absurd in itself. I'm challenging that. Forces. We have these very powerful productive forces, and we can't even push them to their capabilities because it would crash our economy, regardless of what we actually.
Yeah, but I don't think that's bad. I don't think that overproduction is necessarily a good thing. That just seems. I don't think that works. I think maybe we could find some areas where overproduction might be a good thing. Like, but no, I think that, like, depending on how you allocate resources, overproduction would be a really bad thing. If we built 1 trillion houses and cut down 1 million forests and polluted the fuck out of everything or destroyed ecosystems, or if we produced like 1 million clothes or whatever and we ran out of like cotton or other fiber for other things, like I don't think that's. I don't think that overproduction is ever. I don't think I would ever say or let somebody say like, overproduction should be a good thing. That just seems like a really weird statement to make.
I really feel like you're missing my point. I wasn't trying to say overproduction is a good thing.
I thought you. Okay, I'm sorry, because I thought I specifically heard you say overproduction should be a good thing.
I'm saying it should be a good thing that we have the capabilities to have massive resource abundance. That everybody should be fed without question, that there should be shelter for everybody and things like that. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
We have the possibility to do that, but it doesn't work within our capitalist system.
Well, yeah, but the problem is that, like, we have the possibility to do that with the way that our economy is organized right now. I don't know if we have the possibility to do that if we have a system where everybody gets everything for free and everything is like allocated by the government or some central planning system. I know you're not necessarily advocating for these. I don't know where you fall on this, but like under the capitalist system right now, it seems like we produce enough where we could theoretically feed everybody and house everybody. I agree with that, but that doesn't mean that we just need to leave capitalism and all the production will stand as is, because I don't know if that production would still be organized in a way that can do such without like profit incentives being there or without individual actors in a market making money or whatever. Like, I don't know if that's true or not. It doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem like any other country has centrally planned their way out of like every basic human need, but I mean.
Yeah, what I'm just saying is that you can't just give people their food and rent. They have to work for it. They have to have the threat of starvation so that they can go to work and, you know, expand capital for their employer. That's inherent to capitalism.
Sure.
But I'm saying that shouldn't be the case. I'm
Why?
saying
But
we
what's
have
the
enough
alternative?
resources. Hold on, I'm saying we have enough resources that people don't need to work to sustain themselves.
Yeah, but that's
People
if you
should
want to
still
pause.
work,
But that's if you
right?
want to pause what we have in society right now and like reduce a lot of the technological innovation that we could have, or the types of consumer goods we could have now. Is to just say like, oh, this is what I said earlier, and you disagree with it, but I don't understand why. When I said it sounds like you just want to pause like where we're at technologically in society. Like, let's just stop here and stop working, and we're good with our current level of achievement. Like, if we would have thought this before we produced the automobile, we would never be driving cars.
So whenever there's technological advancement, which generally does happen, like, irregardless of capitalism, right? To some degree, like, in the academic sphere, this is done because scientists like to do science and they come up with these ideas and whatever. But if the point is that from the communist perspective, whenever a new machine in production is made, it should be, oh, now we don't have to work as much to get the same amount that we need to live.
Which is like
right?
pausing
but
society.
That's not what happens. No.
Yes.
Okay, if society needs more, then they can make more. But if they don't need more, then they don't make more. You're saying that in order to have progress, society needs to continually be overproducing, continually expanding, in order to have any type of technological process at all. But they're two separate things.
I don't think so. If you have the ability to produce something more efficiently, then you want your labor to be allocated into different sectors, right? So for instance, under NAFTA, we exported a lot of our manufacturing to Mexico. But this doesn't mean that manufacturing disappeared in the United States. It allowed some people to further specialize in other industries. In your world, it seems like if we're able to manufacture something more efficiently, oh, well, then those manufacturers just stop working. But we don't want them to stop working. We want them to specialize and work in something else. This is where a lot of our advancement comes from.
Oh, well, of course. I'm not saying these people are just gonna go home and play fucking video games.
Well, wait. So then, what do we disagree? Then you want them to continue working?
I'm saying that, well, if we want to get into specifically like work under communism and stuff, the way we even view work to begin with should be changed. I think it should be. You should do something because it's what you want to do. Essentially, it's fulfilling to you, and this whole like distinction between having to be employed, working for somebody else, working to expand capital.
What if people don't want to be like chemical engineers or some of these more boring, or like pharmacologists or whatever, these jobs that like society needs? How do you fill out every single job if you're not doing it with a market?
That's not really something that I feel could really be a problem. That's not how things work.
Come on, this is bullshit, dude. Come on. You think that every single job that we need filled in society, everybody would just magically sort themselves into the exact way that we need labor allocated?
Not magically, dude. Obviously there's going to be some kind of planning that happens. I'm not saying central stalinist planning or some shit, but I'm also not trying to specify specifically what it is, because it's not really my... Hold on, it's not really my job to say specifically what a future society may or may not want to do.
This is such a weaselly defense. Hold on. Okay, so I'm asking you...
No, because here's the thing. When peasants started overthrowing the feudal lords and stuff, did they have a grand plan of how capitalism was going to work? No, they didn't even have the word fucking capitalism. They
but these guys weren't sitting in their college classrooms at 24, like with the luxury of thinking up whatever economic system they want. You should be able to answer like a pretty simple question.
I'm not thinking up an economic system, dude.
Okay, well, like
that's the point. That's what you seem to be misunderstood on. You're trying to pin me down on these specific.
No, wait. Hold on. I'm not trying to pin you down on anything. I'm asking you an incredibly fundamental, basic, super ultra simple question that you should easily, in an instant, you should have an answer to this for me very easily.
If I was trying to propose a grand utopian society,
I'm not asking for. I'm literally just asking, like, how do you decide who works what jobs? That is an incredibly easy question. If you haven't thought of that, I don't know why you would ever talk to anybody about any of your ideas. Like, if you don't even answer that, well, I don't know how people would do their jobs. Like, that's like a pretty important part of what you're proposing.
You're coming at this from the completely wrong angle, dude.
What is the angle I'm supposed to come at it from?
It's more viewing just capitalism as a progression of history that eventually should hopefully progress into socialism, and the specifics of what people like. All we can really say about socialism fundamentally, right, is that it doesn't have a lot of these aspects of capitalism where you're producing for an employer, where you have money and markets, and that's how things are done. The most basic things you can say is that like it's worker-owned means of production, so the people who are actually working there themselves are going to decide how things are run. The society itself is going to decide how things are run. Maybe you want to say, oh, I think it would be more likely that people would go with planning, and that's how you would allocate labor, whatever. That's not my interest. It's not what I care about. What I care about is analyzing how capitalism works, analyzing how it's inherently self-defeating, and analyzing what it must then inherently follow to. Because this is the thing, just from these like most fundamental basic definitions. I mean, the one I gave from capitalism earlier, right, about how it's just producing things to be sold. Can we then from there speculate about all the possible differences? You know, because the US and Saudi Arabia are both capitalism, but are they in any way the same society? No. We can't theorize how things like that are going to pan out. It's going to be radically different from context to context, place to place.
Okay, that's fine, but I'm going to sit here and I'm going to defend capitalism to the death before switching to some system where we have no fucking idea about how any part of society will ever be organized.
There's never any fucking idea how anything is going to be.
But that's not true. Even from the movement to feudalism
came about.
No, that's not true. It wasn't like one night, like all over the world, people flipped a switch and just became capitalists. There were tons of market structures that evolved over time, where some of the fucking workers on some of the serfdoms or whatever would go out and they would sell their crops to other people, or you saw these smaller markets that would pop up in different areas that were tried and true, and then eventually that grew into a larger thing. This is not true that feudalism overnight just magically became capitalism out of thin air. Like, these ideas were tried and tested over time, and sometimes they grew into like larger systems, and then people started to go with it. Much this, like, and we've tried it with socialism, but every single time that's been tried, it's miserably fucking failed. Now, whether that's because central planning doesn't work, or because capitalist countries are too competitive and imperialize and fuck these countries over for whatever reason, but like, no, I disagree with this characterization that capitalism popped into thin air like the Big Bang and just took over the whole world. I don't think that happened.
That's not what I was trying to say, though.
Okay, it sounded like you said that capitalism, that's how capitalism came about, that it just popped into nothing and nobody had any idea how it worked.
No. What I was saying is that there wasn't a grand plan from the people involved in, you know, abolishing feudalism.
Sure, there wasn't there wasn't a grand plan initially, but there were incremental steps taken towards it to make it work.
And it would be the same thing. It would be like a very similar thing with socialism.
Yeah, but when I asked you
We're
earlier about like,
not going to overnight exist with socialism. But the people who then carry out these revolutions or whatever, or maybe it won't be revolution. I'm not necessarily. I mean, personally.
Well, but it sounds like it, because earlier you told me that for this to work, there literally has to be a global authoritarian socialist revolution. Every other country has to be forced to act in a socialist manner.
Yeah, you're right. So that's a different topic about how the possibilities of achieving socialism. There are different people like Zizek, for example, if you know him. You know, he's very much a Marxist, but he doesn't necessarily think that maybe revolution is required or even possible. So he, you know, personally, I think it probably would be required and possible. But if it's not, then great, and it can be a more gradual process like that. But really, there's no way to tell until it happens. But the point is that, again, even with the violent revolution where things are overthrown overnight, that's still not then everyone's going to wake up and it's going to be socialism instantly. You're going to have these transitionary periods of people literally just figuring shit out. And like the most Marx himself ever did in terms of looking at how the society might be run is he would literally just say, okay, I expect that because of the societies that people live in now, and that's 150 years ago, that it would seem like most intuitive for people to do things like use labor vouchers or shit like that, or use like some kind of planning system. And he wasn't necessarily talking about central planning back then, obviously, but the point is that all you can do is you can look at these transitionary periods between modes of productions. You can take guesses about how people are going to figure these things out to remedy the problems that they're faced with and the contradictions that they're faced with in their existing society, and where they're going to go from there. That's all you can say. And that again, it's not my place to be this person that can like speak for these people in the future. Okay. Just as much as it is for like the ancient Greeks to speak for the peasants building capitalism.
Okay.
You alright, man?
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep defending capitalism and patching it until I guess it collapses inevitably, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, like, you can do that. That's great. I mean, I myself, you know, fucking Bernie is cool and everything, or I guess, you know, my equivalent is fucking Corbyn, and I hope they get in, obviously. I'm not going to, you know, spend my time campaigning for them or anything, but the point is that what I'm saying is fundamentally built into the system itself. Capitalism, like, it is built to fail, and the example I gave even is just one very simplified example of how this works. You know, if you actually read Capital itself, there are like 11 different built-in ways where capitalism is self-defeating, and it's, you know, I fully support you, dude, if you want to say, oh yeah, keep capitalism patched, like don't let people fucking starve in the streets, you know, because of capitalism and stuff. I'm there with you, but what I'm trying to get across to you is that eventually it has to go. And it has to be replaced with something else. And we can either choose fascism, which is, you know, going to be a response to again the falling society, and it's going to try and brutally crush anything that opposes it, or we can either go for socialism, which obviously is going to fight it back against fascism, hopefully, and hopefully try and build a new society where the things that caused that initial unstability don't exist anymore. That's all it's going to be.
Okay. All right. Do you have any final parting thoughts for us?
I'd like to just know at all because okay, so I've been catching up on some of these previous debates you've been doing with socialism stuff, and obviously you think they've been a mess. I would agree they've been a mess, and you've had some real crazies on it. It's been insane. Can I know, have I made up for any of these people at all? Have I kind of shown you there might be different avenues or perspectives in socialism, or maybe it's not as fucking mental as some of the people we've spoken to? Have I budged you on anything at all? I really am curious, like from a goodwill perspective.
No, I don't think so.
Damn. Okay.
You're
Well,
basically
you
saying
fucking
like
shot me down, man.
there are problems with capitalism that like I mean the Marxist point of view is that capitalism has inherent contradictions that will necessarily cause the dissolution of capitalism, right? That's like a big Marxian
Yeah, yeah.
claim. I don't know if these empirically are even true. Obviously,
Well,
we
no,
have
I told you they are empirically true. I can give you the study. I'll give you the study
you don't
right now.
have any studies that everybody agrees shows that capitalism will necessarily collapse. The idea that like boom bust cycles are inherent in capitalism isn't evidence that capitalism will necessarily collapse. This is why we have things like central banking and monetary policy to try to combat these things, right? Like so I mean like so I don't know if capitalism is inevitably doomed or if we can use extra policies to remedy this. So things like monetary policy, for instance, or other types of policies. So yeah, and then I mean everything else is just like we have no idea what a communist or socialist world would look like. So I mean I can't really have an opinion about that, I guess. But
I mean, well, like I said to you, dude, you can't, you know, you can't implement policies to bring out technological advancement and competition in capitalism. These are like really fundamental things just in the mode of production, and all of the examples that Marx brings up that I haven't even mentioned are again so fundamental that you can't just make laws to
I mean,
wave
didn't
them
Marx
away.
literally think that like weaving looms would cause like the entirety of like civilization to like stop working? Like, didn't Marx theorize a long time ago that we would run out of jobs for people to do because industrialization was making labor so efficient? And I mean, that's not even remotely true. And we're at levels of industrialization that are impossible for him to have ever imagined. So I mean, like, it seems like that. Is this the lump of labor fallacy? I think it might be called. But the idea that like, oh no, once our modes become so efficient, we're no longer going to have jobs for people. That doesn't seem to have happened yet. Like.
Well, I can't speak to those predictions you mentioned about Marx. I'm not familiar with them. But in regards to everybody becoming unemployed, we do kind of have that. It looks like we have that being thought about more in the mainstream with people like Andrew Yang and stuff who are saying we need a universal basic income to deal with an automation crisis. But again, the communist perspective, instead of just paying these people who are now unemployed and literally do not have any purpose to work, we just reduce the amount of time we have to work in general. We focus on like human need rather than fulfilling the needs of capital, because it's just this amorphous social blob which really dictates all actions in our society and our lives that but it doesn't have to.
Okay.
Sorry, when you say okay in that meager tone, it just like
Well, because like
I don't
if
know
I
what to do.
presuppose like all the things that you presuppose, and I agree with you, capitalism is inherently
what have
doomed.
I
So something
presupposed?
that
What have I
capitalism is
presupposed?
100% going to cause like a massive implosion because the boom bust cycle is going to lead to people being massively starved or whatever, and then after that we have to go to either fascism or some form of like worker organized like society. Like I mean, like if I accept that, if I
I
accept
thought I set that up pretty well from first principles, like that crashes are built into capitalism.
yeah, but a crash being built into something, it doesn't logically follow that that system is necessarily going to collapse afterwards, right? We've survived crashes before, much worse than the ones that we've had
totally.
recently.
Okay, that's fair enough. But how did we survive the Great Depression with a world war and fascism and shit
Well,
like
then we
that?
changed our monetary policy. Look at how absolutely fucking horrible.
Okay, yeah, after, but like that's not
How
we,
everything
like,
works. Things are in a response to other things, sure. But I mean, like, look at how horrible the 2007 crash was. People were saying, like, fuck, this is another Great Depression. And, like, within a decade, because of the insane amount of monetary policy that we enacted, we were able to catch up. There's still people that are hurting, of course, or minority groups, especially black people that were disproportionately affected by that. But, I mean, I think we bounced back pretty fucking well. Like, yeah, we still have a lot of problems, but people were literally calling for the Great Depression 2.0 post-2007, and it didn't happen. Our monetary policy fucking kicked ass and, like, got that shit,
okay,
like, revved
okay.
up again.
I
So, mean,
get what you're saying. No, I do get that point. That what if we just deal with these crashes as they come? We recover from them. We enjoy the booms in between, even though we haven't actually had a boom this time, and we're probably gonna have another crash pretty soon. But we just deal with that as it comes. We make the policies, and we just do that forever. Okay, but if we take again this falling rate of profit thing, the point is that you're only, in my perspective, kicking the can down the road.
Well, I don't understand why your falling rate of profit is important. Like, just because you're making less profit per item, if you sell more items, then it's fine. Or if you're able to manufacture...
Exactly. So sorry. So then how the fuck do you keep selling more and more and more of one item that people don't necessarily need?
Imagine if you created a widget, okay, and you sold that widget, and that and that widget like became so efficient. I don't know. Maybe you would sell like millions of those widgets. Like, do you think that's impossible to do?
I'm sorry. Could you?
What if widgets become so easy to make that you just start selling tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of these widgets?
Why do people need that many widgets though? that it comes a point where widget production gets more and more efficient. You can make more and more, and you're trying to sell more and more, but people only ever need a certain number of widgets.
Yeah, because you want to pause where we're at right now.
No. This
Yes,
isn't
wait,
talking about
listen.
What I want to do.
What-
No,
because-
no, this isn't talking about what I want to do or what I want to implement.
Listen,
society.
okay,
This
wait,
is just a
I
fact.
because I can give real examples of why you're so wrong, okay? Why would anybody need to be able to make hundreds of transistors? That's crazy. Like, a few transistors is enough to do some pretty basic things. Well, guess what? A microprocessor today has billions of transistors. If this was a widget, you would have stopped making these when we were in the triple digits of them. Why would we ever need more than that? And I'm sure I could find a million different examples of things that we produce a massive amount of because we're able to do things with amazing technologies that didn't exist a long time ago.
Dude, again, we made this point before, right? About, oh, well, we would just stop making semiconductors and that would be that, and we'd never make another again. You know, maybe at first we would, but then someone would come along and say, hey, if we made a shit ton of these, we could make microprocessors, and they sound pretty great. Then you would get to making the microprocessor.
But that's not how that works. You have to incrementally improve
not
your
under
production.
capitalism, no. But
No,
like,
under anything. Nobody is ever going to say, like, oh, well, you know, I can make 10 transistors. Ooh, dude, I bet if we made 20 billion of these, we could make an i9. You have to incrementally ramp up your productions and get to things where that are more affordable to make these little jumps in order to do it. Like, we didn't
Yeah,
start
if
out with the
you're talking
iPhone
within the
X, right?
You're talking about the like prices and how much it costs to do that, and again, like that's talking about within the confines of capitalism. But if you didn't have like, you know, having to worry about prices and having to worry about having a business stay afloat for as long as it takes to have a microprocessor appear in our like consciousness, then yeah, sure. But like that's not. We're trying to literally just do away with those fetters altogether, right?
I don't know. I totally disagree with all of this, but I mean, I don't know.
All right, man. All right.
Listen,
I
I
mean,
love
if
you. You're not like a screaming moron or whatever. I know. So like sometimes I get real mad at like the people I talk to. I don't think you're like a horrible person or anything. Okay. I love you and I.
Oh well, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. Are you a Brexiter? You are, right? You're pro Brexit.
Oh, where'd you get that from?
You're a Corbyn supporter.
Dude, I'm a physics student, so I understand that if I ever want to do any research in my life, I kind of need the fucking EU.
Okay. All right. Just
Yeah.
fair. All right. Well, hey, I love you,
But
buddy.
I mean, yeah, we could talk about Brexit, but that's the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Be careful.
All right. Well, I enjoyed the conversation, so thanks for that.
Yeah,
But,
all right.
Yeah.
Thanks a
Yeah.
lot. Corbyn is not pro-Brexit. I thought that generally his party was anti-Brexit, but he was like he kind of like stuck his neck out and was pro-Brexit. Oh, did he change to a Remainer now? Wait, oh, we got a lot of disagreement. We got a lot of disagreement in chat. I thought that Labour in the UK was generally anti-Brexit. That Labour in the UK was generally Remain, but Corbyn himself was pro-Brexit. On July 2019, Corbyn reversed his position on Brexit, coming out in full support of calling a second referendum on the issue. Oh, holy shit. Okay, well, he's a crypto Brexiteer. Okay. Fuck. I'm so ready to be done with the lefty argument.
But it's not fair when I say, hey, your system failed to address this or failed to do this, for you to point and go, well, these are still some problems under...
Well, hey, what's up, buddy?
Hey, I'm good. What's up with you?
Nothing much.
All right, so I want to talk about socialism. I hear you have some thoughts about that.
A little bit, sure. Where do you want to start?
Sure. So I guess my understanding, I haven't watched everything, is that you think that the idea of having an economy with like workers' control of businesses would be impractical. If we say that like what socialism could be would be a society where maybe like some key sectors of the economy are nationalized, but like if you still have a private sector, we try to make it one that's dominated by workers' cooperatives. And is your view, as I understand it, that like that wouldn't work, or that would lead to really bad consequences, something like that?
I'm not entirely sure if it would work or not. I don't really have anything against co-ops. It seems like there are some co-ops that are pretty successful. I guess I just don't like the I don't like the I get like the general feel from lefties that instead of like trying to like modernize our economy and our workforce, the goal is to make it so that everybody can have like a job like at a manufacturing plant or McDonald's and make like $30 an hour, and that just seems like really backwards thinking, I guess. I don't know if that's necessarily related to like a socialism versus capitalism thing, but
Well, it could be related. So, well, I mean, like one way that the two topics could be related is that if you, I mean, might actually run the other way around, right? So, like an argument socialists use sometimes is that under capitalism, if you have new technology, so some of those jobs you're talking about might be eliminated by that technology, then some people just end up losing their jobs and they're kind of desperate until they can find a new job. Whereas if workers were controlling the businesses, then once those some of the labor that had to be done by humans is automated away, then maybe the necessary grunt work that still had to be done, people could just, vote themselves fewer hours, and they could, and nobody would like have to lose economically because of that.
well, how do you really think that like if workers, let's say for instance you had a manufacturing plant and you can make this plant, like 10,000 times more efficient. Do you really feel like people would vote away their jobs?
Well, the reason that people wouldn't vote away their jobs under the system we have right now is that, like, if people didn't have, if you didn't work, then you don't have a paycheck, right? So if we had automation so it could get rid of most of the work that needed to be done by humans. So let's say that, like, there were, what used to be done by, 4 people could now be done by 1 person. Well, one way that you could handle that is to just fire, lay off the 3 people and have 1 person do as much as they did before. But if the workers were controlling the company, then they could just say, hey, why don't we each just work 2 hours instead of the 8 hours that we used to? And since we're getting just as much produced, then, we could all still earn what we did before.
So then instead of those people moving into working other jobs that could be worked in the economy, they still would make the same amount of money just working 25% of the time?
I mean, if that was the, ideally, yeah. I mean, if they have and of course, people that might also free them up to pursue other interests. If you only had to, work a much shorter amount of time, then, maybe you'd be able to go back to school, pursue,
Do you think
pursue other projects.
Is it realistic that our economy could thrive in a global economy when all of our workers are working like 1 or 2 hours a day because they don't get other jobs because some of parts of their previous jobs had been automated?
So I guess I'm not quite sure I'm following the question. So if it's the idea that that because we would it would be just as productive as it was before, right? As many widgets are being produced at the widget factory as they were being produced before that, but because it takes less human labor to do that, that in itself doesn't seem like, even if the United States was just an island of socialism, which, by the way, I don't really think would happen. I think that the United States, being probably one of the political cultures in the world that's most hostile to socialism, I have a hard time imagining the United States becoming socialist unless like everywhere else was first.
Yeah, sure, but I'm just imagining like in our entire economy, all of these jobs that end up getting automated. So like in the ideal capitalist world, the market would send a signal that these sorts of jobs aren't needed anymore, and then people would fill in other jobs or would acquire higher education to work different types of jobs to maintain that automated system. But basically becoming a service economy, right? As our economy has kind of moved into that direction. But then it seems like the alternative in your world is that in a socialist economy, these workers would never do that because somehow all of the like McDonald's automates all the jobs away, manufacturing plants automates all the jobs away, and then all the workers say, oh well, we'll just work 2 hours a week instead then, and that'll be okay. That's
well, I mean, one thing that scenario assumes is that nobody has any other aspirations for what they'd like to do with their lives besides working at McDonald's. If they had could be that once their time is freed up, then people would pursue all sorts of, creative endeavors that might actually end up helping the economy a lot more.
Do you think it's realistic, though, that all of the spots in our economy that need to be filled would be filled if we just let people kind of like be guided by what they want to do and we ignore like all of the market signals for jobs that might be needed?
I'm not sure that for ignoring all the market signals for jobs, for jobs that might be needed, because what we're talking about are people who, had been working, at McDonald's, say, or, whatever the future socialist equivalent is of McDonald's, and then, and then some of the, we get a automatic burger flipping machine, and so some of those jobs are automated away. So if they're going to continue to work at that company, then everybody might have to work fewer hours. But like, if there's something that like needs to be done to, I mean, like, because you're talking about going into like service jobs, and I kind of try to envision a society where there were fewer service jobs, and that doesn't necessarily seem like a disaster.
Well, in the
So-
U.S., it seems like that's the direction that our economy's been headed in for quite a while, for like the last like 40, 50 years, right? Is moving more towards a service economy.
Okay, but I mean, I'm wondering, like, if there were, let's, because you seem to be talking about new avenues for for economic growth that might open up. And fair enough. Maybe if you didn't have as much economic pressure for people to go into those as you did before, because people aren't desperate because they're between jobs, maybe some of those new sectors that would have opened up otherwise open up more slowly. But I'm not sure that that's an unambiguously bad thing, especially when you start to think about the ecological effects of constant growth for the sake of growth.
Well, I mean, you say constant growth for the sake of growth, but if other countries are growing under more aggressive, like market-based patterns, and then we have a ton of companies like paying people to not work, I don't know. It just seems like that's not like a healthy, positive direction to move, I guess, into the future. Like, say, for instance, say McDonald's starts to automate a whole bunch of things, and then those workers are looking for other types of work, and that might mean that other businesses could open up because now there's more labor available. That just would never happen, right? Because people would continue to work for 1 hour a week or 2 hours a week at McDonald's doing nothing.
Yeah, so the premise of the question was about international competition, and this does go back to the point about whether we're envisioning the United States as an island of socialism in a still capitalist world. And I suggested earlier that I wouldn't expect it to happen that way. But even beyond that, of course, there are still going to be all the time new, like, just, let's say people are worker owners of McDonald's, and so maybe more people get to keep their jobs at McDonald's because they're working fewer hours than happened before. Then I'm not. That doesn't mean that there's nobody who would be working in new sectors. That they have more people turn 18 every day. It might mean that there were fewer. And if we are imagining that that the United States is the only island of socialism in the world, then I can understand the concern a little bit more. But if we're imagining a global socialist world, then we might just have a slower global growth rate, which might actually be a lot better for the planet.
So I definitely don't disagree with you there, but I mean, I don't know how to engage with that idea. Like, socialism could work in the United States if every negative outcome that I'm perceiving, that a lot of my negative outcomes are going to be related to losing in global markets. If every single country became socialist, then we would all be kind of roped in together on these same socialist policies. But I mean, I don't know how to engage with that. Like, obviously that's fantastical, right? Like,
well, I mean, I think it's more fantastical to think that you get socialism in the United States before it became the dominant global system, given that in a lot of other countries throughout the world, you're starting off with much more, much more prior consciousness about socialism. People, the political spectrum starts out much further to the left in many other places. Certainly, the idea of like cooperatives, like there are European countries that already have bigger cooperative sectors than we have. The United States, last time I checked, has something like less than a 7% rate of unionization, even in the private sector. So I would argue that it's more unrealistic to think that the United States would get there first. But I guess I had thought that you also had, beyond the sort of international competition concerns, you had some kind of innate concerns about the about whether, like, worker self-management could really work effectively. Like, if I think one of the previous people that you discussed with had kind of dropped a bunch of statistics about how workers cooperatives in many ways are at least as productive as traditional businesses. but I got the impression that you were still skeptical at that point, because I think your perspective was kind of, well, if these are so great, right? If they're so productive, if they're so efficient, then like why don't they dominate the economy already? I mean, is that kind of your concern?
Yeah, well, I'd be wondering. So you'd either have to demonstrate that there's some capitalist, I don't want to say conspiracy in a derogatory way, but that there's some like institutional barrier to entry for co-op stuff that makes it hard for them to start, in order to persuade me more. And then also for the record, I don't have like, I'm not like deeply rooted in my position that I like hate co-ops. Like if co-ops work, and like honestly, the idea of a co-op working, like the fact that you have partial ownership in a company, that feels good to me. That seems like a good thing. Although I don't know, like if you've got a big company, I don't know if owning like 0.001% shares in your company really motivates you that much more to work for it, or voting on management or whatever would motivate you more. But yeah, I'm not opposed to it if it actually ends up working well in the real world.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So, I guess I was going to say a couple things about that, which are that I think even without kind of a big capitalist conspiracy, I think there are some reasons why, like, you know, even like, okay, when you see these articles, hey, workers cooperatives, this study shows or that study shows are, you know, so productive or efficient, I think, okay, well, why aren't there more of them? I think that probably the main thing there is that even though the death rate for co-ops doesn't seem to be higher than the death rate for traditional hierarchical businesses. In other words, once they're going, they seem to last about as long. I think the big difference is that the birth rate is a lot lower, and I think that at least one of the reasons that the birth rate is a lot lower is just that structurally, it's a lot easier to get initial capital together for a more traditional business, because you can get investors in it, because you can actually, the investors, instead of just like paying them back, which maybe a workers cooperative could do, you could actually give them a continued share of the ownership of the company going forward. Whereas
as soon as you bring investors in, haven't you kind of lost your purpose?
well, no, that's my point, right? So I think that, like, I think this is one of the reasons why the birth rate even though the death rate is about the same, I think the birth rate is going to be much lower, because, as you say, as soon as you bring in investors, then you sort of lost the point of the co-op. I think another thing maybe that's a disadvantage of co-ops is that in an economy that's dominated by traditional hierarchical businesses, you know, a company can very rapidly expand if you, as much as possible of the output is spent on expansion, right? So like you pay workers very little maybe early on. You spend a lot of time expanding, and it's much harder, I think, understandably, to sell people on kind of voting to live in poverty for the sake of the expansion of the business. So I think, again, these are both ways that I think, as far as the starter capital, this is one of the reasons why most socialists think that you need to have some kind of government intervention to move towards a system based on this. Like, for example, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party in the UK, has a proposal that to expand the cooperative sector, that every time a company is going to go out of business or leave the country or change ownership, then they'd get a right of first refusal if the workers could get together the money to buy it out, to run it as a co-op, and combine that with government loans. We could imagine something even more ambitious, like you combine it with maybe nationalizing banks, so you could have preferential loans to co-ops. But I think the second factor does, again, mean that probably in a co-op dominated economy, because people aren't going to have the same kind of incentives to do that kind of rapid expansion, because that the owners of more traditional companies might have. I think that does mean that you probably are going to have slower economic growth. I think that's true.
So wouldn't you have to, like, if you were to go with this co-op model, then wouldn't you basically have to demand that the entire economy switch to co-ops only? You'd have to ban the privatization of any business. Like, private property would have to be essentially abolished, and capital would all have to be turned over to workers, right? Because like in this kind of economy, like say we take that McDonald's example, right? The capitalist run institution is going to fire all the workers that don't need to work there anymore. The co-op one is going to keep those workers hired and just have them work less. It seems like the capitalist one will always be more efficient and have lower prices and drive the other ones out of business, no?
Well, the empirical evidence doesn't seem to suggest that, right? That like even though the birth rate is lower, the death rate seems to be about the same. So I mean, I can see.
Well, like, so
you know,
I feel like that's not 100% fair. There might be like some industries that maybe co-ops work better in than other industries, but to my knowledge, at least in the United States, there aren't like these massive successful, like it's not a big part of the economy, right? Like these are like a pretty minor feature of the economy. For the most part, it seems like privately ran businesses and like franchise businesses, which is also like private capital, seem to do better at competing in the market than co-ops do.
Yeah. So again, I think that statistically, they tend to last about as long as you started. But maybe your idea is that like that in the industries where they'd be most likely to be outcompeted the fastest, they just don't start in the first place.
Yeah, something like that maybe. That's like a cart before the horse. I could be wrong on that though, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be really interested in seeing more data about that. I mean, it's hard to kind of speculate a priori, but I would. I mean, I would say that that long term, you know, I would like an economy that was, you know, thoroughly dominated by cooperatives, and that you could have as, you know, as like I think there are a lot of ways that you could get there. Like I said, thinking about nationalized banking, preferential loans, this kind of right of first refusal thing.
I feel like when you start getting into like preferential loans, well, so I guess. So when we start talking about preferential loans, we've basically conceded that a co-op will never be as efficient as like a capitalist ran thing, right?
Well, it could be that it's less efficient, but that like in certain respects it might be less efficient, but I'm not sure that that's the whole game, right? Like by kind of like not that I'm saying these things are remotely morally analogous, but like thinking about like slave plantations before the Civil War. There's probably a good reason why it wasn't the case that you could have just ended slavery by getting like free labor cotton farms to outcompete slave plantations, right? That is.
Well, but isn't that my history is really bad, so you can make shit up and I'll lose the argument. But okay, so I'm just fully admitting. But isn't that kind of what happened with slavery? Like, wasn't it the industrialized North that was pushing for it as opposed to the agricultural South because they were more economically willing to like? So wasn't it kind of like an economic argument there, even for slavery?
Well, I mean, of course, the industrialized North was in favor of abolishing slavery because it was, you know, it was in their interest to have people. You know, be like, I think that, you know, their economic system, you know, was favored by free labor, so like they were the ones who were pushing it, but the actual abolition of slavery, of course, had to take place through, you know, force, right? You know that you know the Union Army coming in and
Civil War,
right, the Civil War, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I know that one. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of our most frequently reenacted wars. So yeah, I would say that again, you know, it's not that even you know that even though there is that was the case that you still like the northern industrial economy might have gradually been getting stronger and better, etc. But at the very least, I mean, maybe it would have eventually happened, maybe not, but it doesn't seem like certainly on any kind of reasonable timescale you could have just outcompeted the southern slaveholders, because, and one likely reason for that is that those cotton plantations had some built-in advantages because they could because you didn't have to pay people wages, and like that's more efficient in some ways. But I think that like the question, if we're having this conversation before the abolition of slavery, wouldn't be like, okay, is slavery more efficient in certain respects than free labor? Fair enough, it probably is going to be more efficient in some respects. The question is free labor efficient enough that we would be okay if we transitioned over to
Yeah,
economy based
I
on
understand
that.
what you're saying, right? So like, so to use a hyperbolic example, like if we could power the economy, like if an efficient source of energy was like sacrificing children in order to run like power plants, it wouldn't be a good argument for me to say, well, look, I mean, it's really efficient, right? You're saying that there's a moral wrong that's been committed there that kind of like supersedes the efficiency argument, basically, right?
Yeah, or that, like at the very least, it would be better, it'd be more desirable in
Yeah.
those ways if people could have this kind of control over their day-to-day lives. That kind of autonomy, that would be better.
Yeah, and
so the efficiency would have to be a lot to outweigh that. I think that'd be my perspective.
Sure. Yeah, and I understand that. I guess like my contention then is I would say that like I don't think it's as massively morally wrong as some people present it. That like the way that we compete for jobs right now and the way the markets function now, or at least not to the level where it would be like analogous to like slavery, where I would consider like employment period to be a moral wrong. Like some lefties seem to, right? So I don't know how people feel this way. Like I hear like labor is exploitation. Some people say exploitation is just a descriptive term. It doesn't necessarily mean it's morally wrong. But then I hear other people say that like, well, the fact that a manager can make any money or an owner can make any money off their labor is morally wrong. So I don't know if they think it's all kind of the same. But like I would argue that it's probably not like that huge of a moral wrong as long as other goods are being provided for in society.
Yeah.
My main worry is just back to that global market thing. Like it seems like
Sure, right. No, I get that. So, I mean, I would say on the question of whether it's wrong in itself, and I think you're right. I think that sometimes socialists, we're probably a little bit ambiguous about that, because yes, there's a descriptive technical meaning to the way that we use the word exploitation, but clearly
people morally load it. Yeah.
Clearly the fact that we're using the word exploitation to describe that thing means we don't like it, right? And I think that's fair enough. I think that the issue is not like, okay, is it as bad as slavery or child sacrifice? Clearly not, right? But like I think the issue is whether there's something that's like fundamentally unfair about the idea that most people realistically have no choice but to
Be a worker.
to go to work for somebody who owns a company, because that's like you could start your own business, but like
That's
you
gonna
have
be a
to get
small
starting
fraction. Yeah.
capital. Most of them fail. There are only so many lifeboats out of this situation, and most of them sink.
Do you really think so? Like, here's another problem that I have. Is it? Or well,
Yeah,
go ahead,
okay.
finish.
No, I was just gonna say real quick. I think that the worry is that there's something a little bit unfair about the idea that most people have to do that. Some people, sometimes because of skill, right? Sometimes because of innovation, but most often, at least to a very great extent, because of luck in terms of
Yeah, no, I'm a hardline determinist. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and tell you the story that like, oh, anybody can become a blah blah blah. That's absolutely fucking asinine. Do you really think so? Another thing that I get into the weeds a lot with a lot of socialists is it feels like a lot of their arguments are weighed down by things that aren't necessarily tied to any economic system. So, for instance, what you just said, it kind of sucks that you're forced to like sell your labor to another person, and your whole life is kind of shit because of that, and the chance of you becoming a capitalist are really slim, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah.
Would we necessarily feel the same way if we provided more things to like the lowest level people in our society? So like for instance, like places like Sweden or Norway where education is free, or sometimes you get paid to go to school, or you have like free healthcare. Is it really that bad in a country like this that like you have to be a laborer if there are like these much larger social safety nets and you have like much more opportunity to do things that like give you pleasure or enjoyment in life?
I think it's certainly not as bad as it is here. I think that the kinds of reforms that you have in those Nordic social democracies are very good, and they'd be a massive step in the right direction. I think that it's still okay. So I think that I would say that even in the best case scenario, like not even like Sweden now, but like Sweden in the 70s, maybe at the kind of height of that welfare state that they had, then like even then, I do think that there is something to be said for the desirability of being able to control, have more control and more say in where you spend most of your day-to-day life. But I'd also say beyond that, because that might seem like a little bit like, okay, sure, even if you can see the point, you might still think, yeah, but I'm not going to get that excited about that. But I think another point, Bhaskar Sankara just came out with a book called the Socialist Manifesto that he makes in there is that there are a lot of cases of countries that have passed reforms like that have and sure, fair enough, they've brought about tremendous benefit to ordinary people when they have, but oftentimes since then those do get rolled back because because the people who own businesses, that class of society is still kind of in its position of economic power, and it could always use that economic power when it sort of thinks that it can politically get away with it to start rolling those back. So one reason to think that even something as advanced as Sweden in the 70s, and I don't want to look, I think that those Nordic social democracies, those are probably about as best as we've done in human history, right? I don't want to bash them, but I think that even just for the sake of preserving what's already been won, that alone gives you a reason to want to change the structure of society so that those gains aren't vulnerable to being rolled back in the future.
I don't know. I guess I understand it's easy to point out difficulties in the current systems, and I understand, but it feels like it's a much better solution is to say we should find a way to codify certain reforms either through big laws or something like that, as opposed to saying we literally need to have a global socialist government. That just seems so unrealistic to me that I don't really know how to right.
Yeah, so I mean, anything that's very different from what we've had just gonna seem unrealistic. I would also say that you don't necessarily even need a global socialist government. I mean, I think you probably do need, in certain respects, I think even just to solve climate change, you might need a lot more global integration of governments. But I think you could even just have, if the United States, let's say the United States, China, and the European Union all adopted this kind of radical democratic socialism, that alone might be hard enough to imagine, but that would mean that the sort of main economic blocks of the global economy were in place, and so it wouldn't be the situation that you'd have you just sort of have the United States as the only socialist country, and we'd have to worry the same way that if we only had one country with free labor and everywhere else used slave labor, that their cotton production would run us out of the market. That we wouldn't have to think, well, the United States is the only socialist bastion of socialism in the world, and we have to and we're going to be decimated in this global
Sure.
this global conflict with the capitalist countries.
What's moving forward then? So what is the realistic way forward then for something like this?
Yeah, so I think that you have to start out with social democracy. I mean, I think that you're not going to get from less than 7% private sector unionization to an economy based on workers' control without a lot of baby steps along the way. So I would say, in the United States, Bernie Sanders, all that stuff. That's the immediate way forward, and I would be even more excited about that if it started to. He does sometimes talk about cooperatives, but I would be even more excited by that if he did emphasize that more. That those sorts of Jeremy Corbyn style proposals to at least boost and expand the cooperative sector of the economy, and then maybe if we work on that for long enough, then the sort of possibilities for more radical change might open up.
I mean, yeah, I don't disagree with that. I like that idea. Moving forward, if we had transitioned fully to a social democracy, if we were on the level of Sweden or Norway, and then somebody started talking about how well, we need to move towards more co-ops, or the government banks or whatever that give loans, whatever, I think I'd be a little warmer to it. But just the idea of screeching right now about global socialist governments, it just seems so far out of the real of anything. There are people that have problems today in our economy. There are people suffering today, and the kinds of changes that people are advocating for are generations away, if they could ever even happen.
Yeah, I mean, what I struggle with is that I agree with you. I think that I think that it's going to be a very long transition. I think that we're nowhere near getting there right now, right? You know, I think that you are probably right about the time scale. Although the reason that maybe I am a little bit more sympathetic to the Screechers is that I also think that I'm very skeptical, given the incentives that exist in the kind of economic system that that we have right now, about our ability to avoid environmental catastrophe within that system.
Sure, but like
So-
socialism, like co-ops or whatever, none of that has anything to do with the environment either, though, right? Like, there's no reason to think that like a co-op or whatever would do anything more to address environmental issues than a free market.
Well, maybe not. Like, here's why I think that it might actually help. I think that if you have large numbers of people, who are directly affected, oftentimes by these, by pollution, for example, by these questions, who are in a position to have democratic input into decision making, especially. I mean, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but
Yeah, but, like,
I think that there's an estimate that there's some really small number of companies in the world that are directly responsible for some massive chunk of global climate change.
Sure.
And so if you have, like, one of those companies, even if it wasn't nationalized, even if it was run as a private, cooperative, if you're talking about like many thousands of employees, and they don't necessarily have the sort of huge stake in the existing practices of the company that they would have if they were like major stockholders in a private company, then I think that I'm much more optimistic. The more democratic input there is into the system and people's ability to say, hey, do we want to be able to expand a little bit faster, or do we want, our grandchildren to be able to live on this planet? That, I'm much more confident that
You say that now, but like we already have a democracy, and there's already what percentage of Americans that don't even believe that climate change is real. Like, these would be the same people in the workplaces voting on whether or not we should do it, right? Like, Trump said literally like that climate change is a hoax from China. Like, all of the people that voted for him, which were a lot of worker type people, right? The whole Rust Belt that kind of swung for him. These would be the people in charge of voting in their workplaces on whether or not we should do something about climate change. So I mean, I guess I'm not fully sold on the idea, and this is where kind of like I'm very inflammatory on Twitter. I don't know which tweets you read, but like I said multiple times, like workers are dumb or whatever. I don't necessarily mean that like workers are like a class, like a genetically bred to be stupid people or whatever. But I think in general, like people seem to be like pretty clueless about issues. And this isn't just workers. This is like all sorts of different people for a variety of reasons too, right? Whether we don't fund education, whether you're on a lower class and you didn't have time to pay attention to that shit, for whatever reason. That the idea that like the same people that voted for Trump, if they were in charge of co-ops, they would just magically be more aware or more caring about climate issues. I don't know. I find that really, really hard to believe.
Yeah, well, I guess I'd say a couple things about that. One of them is...
Oh, like, or sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Yeah, I was going to say that, that one thing is that I think that, implementing the kind of, radical left-wing changes that I'm advocating here surely involves convincing a lot more of, I mean, like, unless you convince people to change their minds about a lot of things politically, that's not going to happen. And I don't think that like people's views on climate change, that tends to go along with their views about a lot of other things. And then the only other thing I want to point out was that it's not just that people sort of happen to form these views on their own. That there is a very large and very profitable industry devoted to propagandizing them about. Right?
I mean, you say that, but like
the
these
existing. I mean, how much money does ExxonMobil spend, promoting the idea that this is a myth, that